more than 15 years actually, I've been doing quote unquote scientific research first with transportation planners in what they call non-motorized transportation, which is also called now active transportation, so walking and biking, these sort of very innovative ways of behaving, right? We have to relearn how to do that. We have to do scientific research in order to find out the obvious, which is it's pretty good for you to walk and bike and for your health, but we have to prove it through scientific means. And then I've worked with health people where myself and the students, we really providing services to the health people about how the environment may or may not be related to different kinds of mobility behaviors, like walking or biking and so on. What are the sort of the environmental conditions that would make more people walk or bike or take transit? And we try to measure that so that we can then return the information to politicians and bureaucrats and so on. In this age of data-driven policies, you probably use the same kind of buzzwords now. So we provide the data. Anyway, so I'm not really talking about that research today because I didn't think it was the right kind of setting. And besides, in my less young age, I'm now trying to become sort of more of a generalist and to speak a sort of a more simple language. So this is what I put together for us today. Looking at the health in the city, everybody finally is realizing that we are in an age of the Anthropocene. In other words, life on Earth being pretty much guided by what the human species is doing. And then we're also in an age of population growth. In my own lifetime, I saw the population of the world triple. So even as a teenager, I was living in a world with only 2 billion people. And I can tell you, I remember this world, and it's very different from what it is now. And finally, the world is discovering now that we are urbanizing, right? Everybody's talking about cities. Well, we, not just me, but colleague and I, we've been talking about that and talking to the students about that for 15 years. Watch out, we're building more cities now than we've ever built in the world. You better become a good city planner, and so on. But now it's a reality and everybody talks about it. And so then you sort of narrow down, you say, what is happening with urbanization? What's happening is also enormous sort of economic development. And whereas there's still enormous amount of poverty in the world, there's also much more wealth than there used to be, both in societies like the Swedish society and in middle-income sort of countries where people are living, in general, a much better life than they used to. Although it's not perfect, far from it, right? So, but with economic development come mobility patterns, and that's why I'm sort of narrowing down the field here. Mobility patterns that bring us back to having health problems. And these mobility patterns, of course, quite related to the way we design cities and how we design cities. And this is where health comes into the situation. So this is a map that shows more recently, we're talking about maybe we're making 100 million people city. We know that Mexico and Mexico cities and Shanghai and other places are 25, 30 millions, we can hardly count. So we're talking about the 100 million city. And then we look at the green are the existing sort of very large cities. Let me see if I can see my cursor here. Okay. So very clearly, green large cities in the North America, in the Europe and in Asia. But if you look at the yellow, which is what's projected for 2020, I think all the growth is going to be in Asia, in Africa, a little bit in Latin America and Central America, but not in the Western economies. And we know that. In terms of built environments, I mean, very simply, this is a city, dense city, that the way we used to make them. And these are examples of cities that we are making now everywhere in the world. This is the NSA, National, what is it, Safety Administration, outside of DC. This is a Facebook campus in San Francisco. Quite interesting. I mean, the cities within themselves with huge parking lot around and a freeway around and a little bit of wetlands here. And here, a sort of random city in southern Spain, which fell in the middle of the Depression and has left open. But if you look at the difference, here we have very compact kind of city where the mobility patterns of people in general will be very different from what they are here. You can bike here, but it's not very pleasant. You can bike here, but you certainly would not, most people would not bicycle from, outside of this area. You would bicycle from within. And these are the kinds of environment that we build, design and build everywhere now. To take two examples, Pudong, very dense environment in Shanghai, built in the last 20 years, not very pedestrian friendly, but very dense. Here you have the Seattle itself, very much less dense. This is actually the road where we put a light rail in the middle of that. So it's not in the middle of nowhere, but it does look like in the middle of nowhere. And I'm not exaggerating because the businesses have to put a sign saying here, "You hungry?" 15 grocery stores, I don't know where they are, but they're here, somewhere in this environment. And then, of course, the Texans have a joke about pedestrian right-of-way yielding to the cars. So these are the kind of environment that we create, and it has a big effect on the mobility pattern. So basically, what I will sort of call car-centric urban mobility affects health, and it affects in 4 basic areas. What is called road trauma, and that's basically death and injuries due to motor vehicle traffic and water pollution. Sedentarism, lack of activity. That's not just due to transport, but in great part due to transport, and obesity. And so I'll go quickly through some of the statistics to show the kind of damage that these car-centric mobility patterns are doing to our health. One is the agents of death. If you look at the agents of death, the 10 first one that explain about half of the death. You have 24 million here and 52 million total. So you have half of them are listed with these kinds of quote-unquote diseases. And one of these diseases is road injury. And road injury accounts for about 3% of the death. Some of the road injuries result in like strokes and so on. So they added also into this this accounting. The other measure that is used that's probably even worse than fatalities or death is the so-called disability-adjusted life years. The fact that if you are in a collision and then you're disabled for a good part of your life, and so these life years of disability are counted. There are ways of measuring that. It tells you that more than 3% actually of these disability years are due to road injuries or road trauma. Air pollution, quickly, depending on how you measure it, 30 to 60% of the air pollutants that we have come from transport. And then here is from the same metrics as the ones on death. Here you have death rates and injuries from injuries and air pollution related to motorized transportation, 2010. The blue is death rates due to road injuries, and then the orange is death rates due to air pollution. So taking Western Europe as the sort of the basis, this is the line that sort of runs through here. You see that about 8 deaths, the rate is about 8 deaths per 100,000 population. And you see that everybody has higher death rates due to road injuries than Western Europe, everybody. Now you look at air quality or deaths due to air pollution. You see that actually Western Europe and parts of Asia have very high death rates due to air pollution. Air pollution generated by road transport, not any kind of just air pollution. And you see that areas in Africa, for instance, the death rate due to road injuries are very high, but the air pollution rates, death rates, are low because there are not so many cars yet or vehicles. Then, of course, in terms of air quality, we know that what you use as a transport mode generates more or less air pollution. Here, if you talk about CO2 pounds per passenger mile, these are the differences that you have. If you have a solo driver in a big car, you get to, those are pounds of CO2 per passenger kilometer or per passenger mile traveled. So you have 1.6 here, down to almost 0 in walking and biking, and of course the buses and the van pools and so on are much less detrimental to air quality than any kind of other car. And we have these measures. I mean, the data are there. We can make decisions based on real data. Not that we use this data very much, but I'm just saying. Now, physical inactivity. You've seen probably that graphic here showing mankind's evolution to today. And then you look at general sort of worldwide measures of percent of the population that is inactive. The purple is both sexes. There are differences between men and women being generally less active than men. But you see that the higher the income, the lower the activity, or the higher the inactivity. And that is because we are motorized, and not just motorized for transport, but motorized with your toothbrush, motorized with everything that you have around. We do less and less with our bodies. And so, on one hand, the income is great. We're not as tired as we used to be, bodily tired, that is, but it's coming back to haunt us because we're not physically active enough. So you'll say, well, but look at all these people exercising, jogging, and so on. We see these people, but population-wide, even in the US West Coast, where there's more activity generally than in other parts of the world, because people like to be quote-unquote healthy, only 15% of the population is active, exercises regularly. So, and then there's a good 50% that does absolutely nothing. So population-wide, again, that's an issue. And energy expenditure from commuters, again, that's been measured. So this is a study, small study, 182 people, but done with very objective measures of what people do and how much energy they expend. And just to simplify, it goes from car, bus, car and walking, car and cycling, walking and cycling. And the lighter, the more activity. So you see that cycling is really the best. Walking isn't too bad, but it gives you like moderate physical activity, no vigorous really physical activity. Car and cycling is better than just the car, and so does car and walking. So that tells you, and that's where the health field, by the way, is getting to, is to say, okay, we're not going to tell people don't drive and don't, take the bus and so on. We're just going to say, take it more often, go and, walk or bicycle to that other mode of transport. And then obesity, this is a world map that's not very detailed, but it's interesting. It's showing obesity rates, and obesity is measured by body mass index. So it's a ratio of your weight and your height. It's a very rough measure, but nonetheless, it's pretty good again for population. You see that the dark one have 30% of the population that's obese. And interestingly enough, by the way, you have South Africa and the US, and actually if they had a more detailed map of Europe, all the British areas, by the way, have very high rates of obesity. I won't go any further on that. They're not one explanation, but it's kind of interesting to see that. And you see here, New Zealand actually makes it to this world map. And then, so 30% of population obese. Obese is quite big. Some people can be actually fit and have no health problem if you're sort of tall and have a lot of muscle and so on. You can have a BMI of 30. But for most people, a BMI 30 is not very good. You should not have that. And so I'm just saying that because the standards are not that stringent. That's what I'm trying to say here. And then again here, here is a graphic showing, and that's a huge study in England of 72,000 men and 82,000 women, where they actually took real measures of their body height and weight, as well as amount of fat that people had. And the base here is car, and in a car, if you have 0 BMI, you're going to have 1.5 point less or lower BMI if you're doing cycling, and men have a little more sort of lower BMI than women, but not much. And this is walking only, public transport and active transport, car and public transport or active living or active transport, and then just public transport right here. So you see that there is quite a relationship here between the way you move, you know, for your commute and for every day, and your body weight or body weight status, if you want. And yeah, the interesting things I think of these studies is that they're getting to be quite detailed, and so people outside of our field are sort of really interested in this relationship between how we design the cities, what mode of transport we have in our cities, and what kind of health status people will have. Now, car centricity is globalizing. These are sort of images that are not surprising. 500 meter is a long distance in a city, and you see that even in Cairo, there are huge areas that are just completely for cars. Istanbul, all the outskirts of Istanbul are full of freeways like that. Even Dubai, of course, what would you expect? All the gardens are at the freeway interchange, and that's sort of normal way of designing cities. There's no way you can comfortably bicycle or walk in these kinds of cities. Even Lisbon, you take the center of Lisbon, they put this huge roundabout. That means that when you want to go down here to the center of town, you have to go all around this way and take basically what is not a shortcut. For what? It's not quite certain. We don't really know why we're doing these things. They are these kinds of decisions are made now by transportation or traffic engineers, transportation departments that are totally separate from planners. They often don't talk to each other. And then, by the time it's done, it's sort of too late, and people would sort of come back and say, how could you do that? Well, it's part of the silos of institutions that we have that create these kinds of environment. And then quickly, if you look at the globalization of the car centricity, if you look at these cartograms, I like to use them because they sort of give you a ready-made image of how things are sort of working. This is the geographic land distribution of the world, and this is correspondingly what the population distribution would be. So of course, you have India and China and even Japan. That's quite large because they're large population there. Europe is quite big. So it's it's an area of density. Latin America is not very densely populated comparatively, and Africa not very densely populated either. Then you look at the population in cities, and again, China and India are quite large, and so is Europe. And America is a little bigger, and Africa is still not very much urbanized. You look at passenger cars, and that's a little old. It's 2005 or 6, these figures. But there's no more Africa. And Latin America is very, very tiny. India is tiny, but this is Japan and Korea and the US of A. So this is the distribution of cars. And we know that the next thing with economic developments, I'm coming back to that, this map is going to change. And these skinny countries now are going to get a little bigger. And look at statistics also, the vehicle production of light vehicles to 2012. You see the dip in 28 here. And it goes going up. The light trucks are going up. We'll go back to that. And right now in the US, for instance, you have 253 million vehicles for a population of 319. And then People Republic of China, you have 105 million for a population of 1,400 million people, i.e. 1.4 billion people. So you can see where the future is coming. And this picture is actually better to show the future of motorization. The dots here are motorization indexes, vehicles per 1,000 population. And the bars are the number of vehicles. And so you look at North America between 2005 and 2000, what is it? I cannot read here. 2025? It's not very clear, yeah. So you see, of course, everywhere the motorization is going up. Whether you are in North America, in Europe, in Oceania, in China, it's here, and so on. In India, it's going up also. But the difference is that here you have, in the more, the richer, more developed countries, you have, actually you can see that the growth in the number of vehicles is not going to go much farther. Whether here, this is going to go much farther because you have a lower rate of motorization. So if these people here in China, if the Chinese are motorized the same way as the Americans, this bar is going to be up in the sky. There's going to be, up to maybe 1 billion cars just in China if we continue like that. Now, the thing that's interesting is if you look at wealth and motorization, the relationship is not clear. So in black is the GDP per thousand, so $1,000 going down from Qatar to Chinese Republic, People's Republic of China. And you look at the motor vehicle per 10,000 population, you see that the US, of course, has this imbalance. So do Italy and Great Britain and Greece. Great Britain a little bit, and Lebanon has this imbalance. But otherwise, you look at the rich countries like Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, they seem to be pretty much coordinated. So it's not, motorization is not really related necessarily to wealth. Inefficiencies. Average driving speeds, and that's data from INRIX, that's a pro-car organization that's trying to, always talking about congestion of freeway, that's how bad it is, we have to correct that and so on. They're giving us these figures that the average driving speed in Austin, that's during commute time, is 6 miles per hour. Now that's walking. I mean, that's, that's bicycling. Cincinnati, London, Los Angeles, New Delhi, very, very low. So these would be, it would be faster to walk and bike than it would be to take a car. And yet we continue to produce cars, and we continue to accommodate cars everywhere in our cities. So part of the movement is the supersizing. I'm not inventing that because we have, you've seen the movies of supersizing bodies, servings, but also cars. And then I'm going to show how we also supersize the street blocks. Which comes first, I'm not sure. Bodies, food, cars. And then here, there's a change in the sales in the US. I take this photo, by the way, I just have to walk around the parking lot, just take a photo. And my next one, where is my next one? Oh, here. Sales of cars, sedans, minus 9% last year in the US. Light trucks, plus 16.3%. And SUV crossovers, 21.6% growth. I heard that Detroit is thinking of just stopping to make cars. First of all, they make much less profit on regular cars than they do on the light trucks. And why should they do that? And then the ad says, today's pickups are safer and more comfortable, and sales to women, are you listening, women, and families are on the rise because they're safe and comfortable. Could one be right for you? How do you like that? I don't think I'm exaggerating. It's coming. And the SUVs. Scales and size. Now in cities, we've also confused scale and size. The scale of the street block, urban block, we know that, become a freeway interchange. This is at the same scale in a part of our university district in Seattle, about 18 street blocks. It takes about 5 minutes to walk this way, about 8 minutes to walk this way. And it's the same scale as about half of that freeway interchange. I think we're mad. Here's another example, 19th century Paris. 19th century, 20th century, 21st century. Paris, we have about not quite four arrondissements here. Interestingly, about 100,000 people now in this area of town. There used to be 330,000 in the late 19th century. So we know that, loss of population, but it's not a loss of population, it's that we're taking more space. And then some people will argue that half of the apartments are empty anyway because they're owned by part-timers, right? And so the densities are sort of lower. Nonetheless, you look at the mobility patterns in here. There are cars everywhere in Paris, but walking and taking the subway or the bus is really the way to go. You can take Ubers also, especially not, on weekends and so on. University District, 20th century, is called a dense area for an American city, and it has during the daytime about 70,000 people, daytime and during school year. And here is what we're doing now with the outskirts. That's the example of Kunming, but you can take any kind of Chinese city at that time where you have huge super blocks with totally car-oriented. And then you're going to have some subway measure, but you will have to take either an electric bike or motorcycle or a taxi or whatever to get to the subway with this kind of development. Quickly, what are the upcoming threat to health? Street level retail. You heard that expression. So now is all the packages that are waiting to be delivered that people have ordered through email, e-commerce. And empty street level retail. That's the next thing that's happening, where you have a lot of malls are being shut down, or the retail is empty. We can see that already in cities like Seattle, where the retail is either closing or the restaurants are moving to other areas to be replaced by gyms, at the ground floor, or bars. A lot of bars these days. But the shops and so on are definitely going away. And the figures are there. 8 in 10 Americans are online shoppers. 15% buy online every week. And they project 17% of total retail sales will be through the web. So what are the issues that will relate then to mobility pattern? Lower demand for commercial real estate, increases in urban freight, and vehicle mile traveled by truck is a big issue right now because they're delivering these goods. Parking, pollution and noise. And some people, actually some of my colleagues do the studies and say that that's going to be much more efficient. It's much more efficient to order through the web and everybody's packages come at the same time in this one truck as opposed to everybody taking a trip to the store, especially if they drive like they do in the US. The fact is that we order at different time and it's not, I'm not going to order the same time as my neighbor. And so the truck is going to come for my order because it's going to be just on time, but not necessarily will not necessarily be the same truck for my neighbor's order. Packaging waste, that's a big issue. That's aside from what we're doing, but there's also low opportunity for active travel. I've experienced it myself that people, I live in a high-rise building with grocery stores, drugstore within a block, and people, order all their painkillers, whatever, on the web, and they're very distraught because it hasn't arrived on time. And you say, if you cross the street, you have, all the painkillers you want to have, but they're not thinking. And the other thing, that's an aside, in terms of the future of urbanity. So the Amazon has two faces. One face is what they're doing downtown. All these skyscrapers here have been built in the last 2-3 years. They're building more here, and they're building more in an area here that looks actually like the Chinese super blocks that I showed you earlier, with these big streets, totally car-oriented. There's not, the light rail that we're building here is stopping here in the middle of downtown. There's no light rail that's going to be stopping in this area. And we have a couple of bus rapid transit maybe that will go through there, but there's no public transit basically in this area of town that's being built. And then the other phase of Amazon is this, right, at the outskirts that we have everywhere around the world. You can see here, I think this one is around DC, and you can see more of these warehouses in the back here. So you have this yin-yang of great urbanity, at least from Amazon. Maybe Facebook is not like that. Google is a little in between. And then they have the big suburbanization and destruction of rural areas at the outskirts of cities. Automated cars, another threat. Automated cars in cities take more space than regular cars because the sensors need a lot of space in order to protect us. So that's the space issue. And then there's the ethical issue that the sensors will have to find a difference between a garbage can and a child. And we are working, a lot of engineers are working on that problem. It's really an interesting problem, according to them. And to me, it's like a big waste of our energy to sort of develop machines that can distinguish between a garbage can and a child. But that's what we're doing with these automated cars. What are automated? Why are they so hot, the automated cars? Is because what Intel tells us is that these cars will generate 3 billion people's worth of data. I don't really know what it means, but it means a lot. 3 billion people, a third of the world. How many cars for that? I don't know, but this is what we're interested in. We're interested in putting people in cars so that we can start really controlling and measuring everything that people are doing. And it's beyond privacy. It's an issue of why are we doing that? To sell more things to ourselves? I don't know. So the idea is downsizing. It's like the slow food movement and so on. Maybe we've lost the battle already, but it's worth looking at some possibilities. So the first thing is, we can have four-wheelers, vehicles, but they don't need to be big. They can be small. Left side is Italy. This is China, where you have a big mix. You have everything in China. That's why I like China. You have everything is there, and it changes each time. And people make do, and they just adapt. So you have small cars, big cars, and all kinds of two-wheelers. But if one thing that I've seen in Korea is that small cars pay less for parking than big cars. This is what I see from my apartment, and this guy pays the same as this guy or this guy. Why? First thing is to sort of say, okay, I pay my linear foot of parking. Not a very big revolution, but it would make a little difference. People will start thinking. Reduce waste in vehicular parking space. A former student of mine did a very detailed study of parking in Seattle. And we found that on average, an acre which is zero point 0.4 hectare, contains 40 stalls or 40 parking spaces, 8 cars, and 11 people. So you have 8 cars, so 32 stalls are empty, but they're there. So let's look at these figures and start wondering what it is we're doing. You go further and you look at somebody did that. Actually, I couldn't find who had done it. If somebody tells me, I want to give them credit. This is a 2-bedroom apartment, about 90 square meters. And 48 square meters is for parking. That's regulated. In other words, we have to provide, as planners or architects, we have to provide that. And so it's half of the apartment basically is for cars. We've talked about that for a long, long time. There have been schemes, to reduce the amount of parking that's required for residential. Making people pay separately for parking and residential is still not working. And then the killer is we estimated very conservatively how much capital had been invested in parking in the US of A using Seattle as a standard. And Seattle is not, Texas. I mean, it has many fewer cars in Seattle than Texas. And we found that $23 trillion. So $23 trillion, again, what does it mean? It's the same amount that's invested in housing. There's as much capital in parking in the US of A than there is in housing. Mind-boggling. We cannot publish that piece, by the way, in a planning journal. Because the story is, what is the story? That's the story. But we cannot publish it. All right, so urban mobility for health. How about the two-wheelers, the new cool? I mean, that to me, that's very hopeful. All these app-based, dockless, two-wheelers. People are getting all excited. My sidewalk is taken over. My, lanes are taken over. But I think it's really very exciting to see that. And if we can actually turn it on a positive side, we might get somewhere. So this is Paris, and you have all these different apps that you can order whatever means of transport. You have a lot of new cool urban vehicles, including these little scooters and these. There's actually no terms because they call in English they call scooters, and this is also called a scooter. So I don't know. We have to find terms for it. New urban freight vessels. We have that. Even University of Washington has these mail delivery guys. They're very proud of being bicyclists. Look at all the equipment, and they deliver mail that way. They love it. I mean, I said, can I take a picture? Yes. Very happy. That's my grandson. And he's in love with two-wheelers. He's the kind that, when we walk around, I push him like this. And he looks at me and says, metro, because he doesn't think his old grandma knows what a metro is, metro station, that is. So he's on his way to becoming a good citizen. And then these other sort of ways of carrying things. They're very cool models coming out. The same engineers that are excited about sensors that distinguish between, a garbage can and a child are excited about making these kinds of things. Why don't we give them all the money and all the support for developing these kinds of cool vehicles for us so that we can, be, when it's cold or rainy, we can still use them. Mobility for all. The upper slides here are from Shanghai, where people are delivering their kids to school. And yes, there are some, about 30% unscientific studies. 30% of parents come with these big SUVs. And they get out and they cross the street and they double park, triple park, and so on. But 70% of the parents come on bicycles or motorized two-wheelers with all kinds of construction. This double one. They have protection for the child. And they all come and deliver their kids that way. Then there's the publicity for the older generation sort of getting ready to espouse the new modes of transportation, and of course the dogs. So in China, now the big movement is e-bikes, electric bicycles, and there are two kinds. They're the ones that you still have to pedal to get to get the battery sort of functioning. You recharge the battery in part this way, and then the other ones that are a little more powerful that can go a little faster. So there are two kinds of these e-bikes, and you see both kinds in China. In places like Shanghai, you cannot have a fossil fuel two-wheeler. You can have a car, you know, that has gasoline, non-electric, but not the two-wheelers, and which means that the city is much quieter, and it's a really up-and-coming market with 30 million or 15 million of these bicycles being sold in China every year, and we have in Europe about 200,000. Most of it Germany. Germany is the place where they're buying these kinds of vehicles. Japan also, and then US about 80,000. And here's the street scene on. So this is a main street where you have a lane for the two-wheelers on the right side of the street. On the secondary streets, it's free for all. So you have cars and you have two-wheelers and so on. It's not for the organized Swedes or Swiss. I'm from Switzerland, so I can say that. But it works quite well. There's a hierarchy. And definitely the pedestrian is at the low end. So as a pedestrian, you better be careful. But there are all kinds of people, including a person here. And again, those are slides that you take by just standing at the corner of the street for no more than 15 minutes. So it's not a detailed study. So there's a person here taking an elderly relative somewhere, pushing the wheeler, and then you have the taxis and the SUVs. The rent-a-bike, these are shared bikes, and then the personal ones. Dog mobility, and the family mobility, where you have grandma and mother with the baby and the child. Now, for Westerners, you look at that and you're very worried for their safety. And it is kind of an issue. But in terms of efficiency, it's quite amazing. And then some other, the old technology with the new technology, sort of side by side. And what I'm wondering is whether these e-bikes and the app-based travel is going to help us remove the stigma of the bicycle, because the bicycle is really stigmatized. If you take the example of Paris during the German occupation, 1943, there were 2 million bikes that were brought into the city because there was no fuel. And so the city changed completely. Here are some slides. People were, you know, if you sort of squeeze your eyes and you think about the modern technology that I showed you, I mean, it was the same kind of ways of moving people, except the technology was not as shiny as ours, but was pretty well done. And then here's this sort of pretty cool technology here, this very elegant lady into a sort of airplane-like trailer. But the minute the war stopped, 1945, the bicycle disappeared and the cars came right back. Why? Cuba, same example. At the fall of the Soviet Union, they brought in 1.2 million bicycles from China, which came in, you know, a day or two. And then I don't know exactly when, but now you don't see bicycles in Cuba. And yet the country and the cities themselves are fairly flat. There's no money, there's no fuel. Why aren't there more bicycles? It doesn't make much sense. Except that the bicycle is related to times of hardship. So what I'm thinking is maybe with the apps and the modern, or the contemporary sort of attitude for the apps and the young people, the millennials and so on, all of that will be erased and we'll get into a new era of bicycle travel, and especially the e-bikes. Of course, the exceptions are the two countries here, the Netherlands and Denmark. Netherlands, I could find 22.3 million bicycles in the Netherlands for 17 million people. But the other countries, why is it that the bicycle is not taking over? Maybe with the e-bikes. So I compared the e-bikes with the single occupant vehicle travel or public transit, and you see that the e-bike has a lot of green here in terms of cost, congestion, maintenance, parking, the fuel economy. The sort of drawback would be during bad weather and vulnerability, that people are more, you know, if we don't provide the infrastructure, then you're more vulnerable than in a car. And then trip length, you don't want to be on an e-bike for too long. but 6, 10 kilometers, easy. And physical activity is all higher. Compared to human-powered bicycle, the only sort of drawback is really it's more expensive. Congestion is the same. The comfort is higher. And the other thing is some studies have shown that actually, again, women prefer the e-bike. They feel that they're more in control. And I think it's a question of strength, right? Is that if you're, for most women, if you want to avoid another vehicle, another cyclist or whatever, you feel, or you have less power, physical power than a man would have. But that's just an assumption. And then it's longer. And then physical activity. So that's the interesting part. I found this one study, there are a couple of studies actually, but I'm just showing one here, of somebody who took 18 sedentary subjects. So people, not very sport or exercise oriented. And then they got them to do the same journey uphill, and they equipped them with heart rate monitors, oxygen consumption monitors, and then they asked them, all kinds of questions, including the need for shower. This one takes all these modes: electrically assisted high power, walking, assisted standard power, and then cycling. So to me that was kind of interesting and hopeful that even if you have the high-powered bike, you still have similar kind of energy, at least going on this uphill, energy expenditure that you would have walking, and that the low electric or low-power electric bicycle is actually between walking and bicycling. So that's pretty hopeful. So that's the other one that actually that takes care into. This is a study, has not been published, but it looked at the whole total CO emission by mode with the whole cycle. In other words, producing the automobile, using it, and so on. And here is the unit is gram per kilometer per person. And so here, the problem with that is not published. But so they show the car and the e-bicycle is about a third of energy requirement for the car. And then, of course, it's even lower for the bicycle and lower for the bus, but higher for the metros. So these kinds of studies can be done to total energy expenditure. Open questions. I'm almost there. Enrique Peñalosa, who is mayor of Bogota and has been an advocate of cities for a long time, says it right. I think a bikeway is a symbol that shows that a citizen on a $30 bike is equally important as a citizen on a $30,000 car. Now, I match that with another piece of news here. The LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, has 26 e-bikes, but they bought them at $5,000 when the average price of an e-bike is $1,000. I think that's pretty funny. But I also think it's something we want to do. In other words, if the police department is ready to have e-bikes, why not buy the expensive ones so that they are happy and they start promoting the idea of an e-bike? Why sort of, nickel and dime things? Anyway, that's all to say that good old Peñalosa, a $30 bike, maybe there are two of them in Bogota. The bicycles are now a little more expensive than that. So design of street for two-wheelers. We'll talk about that quickly. Noise issues, trees in urban streets, and then hierarchies of circulation and transportation in cities. So revamp the infrastructure. It seems to make sense. These are examples of Seattle. We're going through the pains of having 2 or 3 avenues with real bike lanes. 10 years ago, when I was talking, 15 years ago, pardon me, I was talking about bike lanes that they had put actually in Montreal, because you don't give European examples in Seattle unless you're Mr. Wolf here. But as a European, you cannot give European example to Americans. So I give Canadian example. And I was promptly shut up by a person who says, we won't have lanes here. I said, why? And the reason was that he thought that the cyclists at the time would speed too much and it'd be too dangerous if they had their own lanes. Well, so 15 years later, we're building these lanes. That's progress. It's very slow. People are complaining they're too expensive. But nobody knows the cost of money, because if we build a freeway interchange, it costs 10 times, 20 times more than this. So it's not a matter of money. It's a matter of allocating the money. Here, Paris, a good example of a place that has tried and had the Vélib, quite early. Um, Here is what they show is the plan. This is 1 kilometer, by the way, right here. That's the distance. And you look that the red is what has been built. So those are existing lanes. But you look at the grid is quite coarse. I mean, and the yellow is not separate bike lanes. They are, you mix with traffic. So if you look at, but they are dedicated lanes for bicycle. So you look at the grid, and it is coarser than a kilometer. Of course, within this grid, you can ride your bike with everybody else. So I would say they are on their way, but it's not really done in a very rational way, and it's done in a sort of reactive way as opposed to an active way. Say, let's make the city absolutely bikeable. So not so hopeful. The big issue with bicycle and other traffic, four-wheelers, is speed. So here's an example in Seattle here, which I wouldn't want to be the tourist, by the way, here in the middle of this traffic. They can do it because the traffic is so clogged, it's very, very slow. But it's still not very, very safe. But if you reduce the speed of traffic to walking speed everywhere, and you say, I don't really care if they're cars or not, but the speed is walking speed, then it becomes much easier to sort of accommodate all kinds of transportation. And then, of course, if you have dedicated lanes, it's good. The other thing is speed here. That's another example. These one-wheelers, a lot of people hate them because you have people going much too fast on the sidewalk. And if you say you have one-wheeler, you can be on the sidewalk, but you're not going to go faster, much faster than walking. Then you can control the world. This is an interesting map from the World Health Organization, actually. Speed limits on urban roads by country areas, 2013. These are rough, statistics, but they tell a lot about the different sort of state of mind that people have in different nations. So Canada, they have a speed limit on urban roads. Europe, of course, and then Australia. Everybody else, there's more red than anything. So, maybe that's where we start. And actually, Switzerland has a referendum. People are voting in a couple of weeks on allowing. The referendum is actually very, very twisted. It's not very clear what they're doing, but it was pushed by groups that people said we have to have bicycle circulation or traffic that's as important as vehicular traffic, other vehicular traffic. And of course, politics came in, and then they're saying that they have to accommodate. So it's not going to be as important, but they're going to accommodate at the federal level bicycling. So that's kind of an interesting movement. So here's an example of more street space and trees. All right, if you look at this example of some newish redevelopment of streets in China, so those have been widened streets. And this is what's given for the two-wheelers. And this is what's given for the four-wheelers. And then here they have a bus lane. So you have the four-wheelers has this width, the two-wheelers have this width, and that includes bicycles and electric bikes and motorcycles and so on, and then the buses. And then they have this interesting way of going through the intersection that has no lines or anything, no lanes, but this sort of accepted cultural order where you see all the two-wheelers are going to be here, and then the four-wheelers here, and it all seems to work pretty much. But this is the kind of designs of street that they do in China now when they had this kind of design. This is for the pedestrian, by the way. It's a big circle around that intersection. So the pedestrian really has the least direct sort of route in this arrangement, which is silly. In a place that's choking with pollution, in a place that's choking with people, it's silly to sort of make the pedestrian have the least efficient path. City trees, we're forgetting them, and I don't have time to go into great detail, but even in California, there are studies that show that the number of trees in California are the equivalent of taking 120,000 cars off the road. So more trees, fewer cars on the road from a pollution perspective. Taking the four-wheelers out, the cases of Seoul that are becoming finally well known, because that was done like in 2005, taking a major urban freeway with 100,000 cars every day down to make a park. And there are two roads still along that river, and to daylight a river that was there. And the temperatures around this area have gone down by 3.6 centigrade. Vehicles entering downtown have been lowered also, and there's been a definite hike in the number of people taking buses and metro riders. So that was done in several projects in Seoul, where they're really sort of recuperating the city for people and taking the cars away. And there's so much space for cars, they can still have a lot of cars in Seoul. This, what is this? It's beautiful, isn't it? It is Medusa. And it's a radar that's being developed in France to capture all these motorcycles that have, changed mufflers and that make this horrible noise. And so they're developing that, and with the camera, they're hoping that in a few years they're able to sort of take a camera, and they have the measurement, right, of the noise of these people, and then take a camera and they can just find them directly, and go to their bank account directly. So Medusa is the future. In France, you probably have heard that they took these two areas here were basically freeways. The cars were taken out. In one case, they put a lot of money to revamp and do gardens and so on. In the other case, they did nothing because they had no money, but they just took the road out, and people are walking on this old freeway, bicycling. They have all kinds of animation taking place. And then I'm showing that because they did measurements of noise. Because it's not just to sort of take away the cars and move them around and so on, but we have to sort of monitor what it is we're doing if we really want to get to a healthy state. And in this case, the before, so you see here, this is the river, and this was where the freeway before the expressways were here, taken away, and now it's just a walkway. And then, of course, a lot of the cars sort of the traffic moved to that place that was the street anyway. And so what happened is they did notice that an increase in noise and affecting people living and working around here because they had increased number of cars. And so, it's sort of saying, okay, we're trying to do the best, but we're also measuring, we're monitoring, and we're staying in touch, if you want, with what it is, the effect of what it is we're doing. So finally, ideas come a dime a dozen. And this is not a new idea, but it's trying to combine all these ideas that we've had as, planners, urban designers over the years, and combine them in such a way that we can try and deal with the situation today. So if you think of, reorganizing the cities in terms of road hierarchies, because the question is not to sort of eliminate cars completely. I mean, this is not realistic, but it's to tame the car. And so you look at the different modes of transportation, and we know that these walking, bicycling, electric bikes are pretty healthy for us. And the others, bus and BRT, are not so unhealthy, and they are very efficient. And we have large cities, so we have to have these modes that travel faster than walking or bicycling. So we rearrange the city that way by distance. So walking, people will walk maybe a kilometer. Bicycling, maybe 4 kilometers. And these figures, by the way, are not cast in stone. Electric bike, 6 kilometers. A bus, 2 to 10 kilometers. BRT, bus rapid transit, or metro, 4+ kilometers. And then you regulate the speed. A place that is primarily for walking, you don't have to eliminate the cars, but you just say, sorry, 5 kilometers per hour. And the Vernez, remember the Vernez, the living streets of Holland? That's what they did 20 years ago. They said, you can have your car, but it's 5 kilometers an hour. And and it happens that way because in that street, the child will play in the middle of the street. And so if you're the driver, you see the child and you're not going to go very fast, right? Bicyclist, 15 kilometers an hour, etc. You get the idea. So you have this hierarchy of streets that you think about in terms of length of that people, or the range that people can cover with these different modes, and the speed. And looking at the different metro systems and looking at the distance, average distance between stops, in Paris is 0.6 kilometers, New York 0.84, Boston 0.95, London 1.2 to 1.3, so already a sort of a bigger distance or longer distance. Tokyo the same. And then all the Chinese ones are longer because they wanted to make the metro more efficient. The fewer stops you have, the faster you can go and cover the territory. And of course, all the systems in China have been built in the last 20 years, so they're very efficient and they don't have land problems, so they're also very well laid out, which we can't do in places where you have to pay for the land and it's different. So Los Angeles is longer, and so is Washington, D.C. So you look at average these distances, each one of those can be accessed by walking or biking, right, in theory. Okay, and so here's this hierarchy of expressways, 1,200 meters, bicycle 600 meters, walking 300 by 400 meters. And using the example of an area of Tokyo, of Waseda University in Tokyo. So you have expressways here in red, you have collectors here in red, and then you have local streets here in red in different scales. So this would be a speed in these red arterial here, the speed would be 40, 50 kilometers an hour. Here would be 15, 16, and here would be 5. Again, we can negotiate the second decimal of the speed. So this is the area for the bicycle in yellow. Here we go. And it's a very fine grain, by the way, old part of the city. So it looks like there's a lot of things, but it's actually quite short. It's 600. This is 600 meters. And then we zero into here and get to our walking module. So it's, the neighborhood unit, Paris neighborhood unit sort of, and the CNU, Congress for New Urbanism neighborhood unit also, rethinking that in terms of mode of travel and speed of travel. And so here's a street where there's absolutely no regulation and everybody walks and drives and so on. But there's this sort of statement that nobody's going to speed right here. And there are the trees. So that's kind of my ideal street for the night. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was wonderful. What a systems thinking view, huh? I forgot to say something, but taking it for granted. This is a lecture series within the Center for the Future of Places at KTH, and my name is Tigran Haas, just for the record. So I exist. But thank you so much, Anne. I don't know even where to start, but there's so many of these issues, and I remember the period when I was at the Media Lab at MIT when Bill Mitchell was still alive there, and he was really advocating and even wrote a very nice book for smart mobility. Compact, green, connected, that we can do so much more with the cars than we think we can. But that idea is kind of dispersed and new trends come in and come. And this is the first time I've heard about this combination for the automated vehicle, the ethical and the spatial one. I forgot how much space these cars are going to use, and also the ethical issues, because there's a lot of hype. This will be the new solution.
Oh, yeah.
But very, very questionable after today, or taking it seriously. So what we do here, we're going to open up for discussion and some questions. And I forgot to say that Anne will be part of a very interesting Delphi talk panel on Friday.
Okay.
We have a number of wonderful guests there, 5 coming from all corners of the world. So I'll just open up now for, you can agree, disagree, support Anne's views, question, advocate for vehicles, whatever you like. Okay?
So I'm architect, and I work with types and mobility classes and cultures and types of neighborhoods. And yeah, I can cite you here that says the physical world is inseparable from processes of change, which is kind of a social change to which it's subjected. So how do you interpret all your lecture from this perspective? Like, do you have some kind of physical world and some kind of social world of classes and everything through types? And how do you think this kind of on this scale of kind of type morphological change between cultures and cities will kind of happen? I mean, who will drive e-bikes? Who will be the mobility classes, and who will be what kind of neighborhoods they will have, and so on. So it's a kind of a very broad question, but I really like to hear. Very.
You mean in the future?
Yes.
You're talking about like
I talk about not just e-bikes, but about future mobilities.
future mobility.
Or type of people or type of neighborhoods.
Right. So if I'm pessimistic, if I'm pessimistic, I would take the automated cars pictures that I have. So we have automated cars, and by the way, they have little automated vehicles about yay big that they're testing in San Francisco that deliver the packages, the e-commerce packages. So, then I have this sort of Orwellian, world of everything is moving without any driver except, the sensors, all right? And then everybody stays home in front of their computers, and maybe they order an Uber without a driver, of course, to go to the airport, to go under a palm tree and the sea. That's our life. And then if I'm hopeful, then I take, the Chinese models with all these little e-bikes and all these people, and I see them on even smaller vehicles, the little scooters, and maybe the one-wheelers. And I see them sort of organize their streets so that you still have on these sort of larger, the super blocks, you still have cars, and you have, the metro underground or above ground and the buses that are there. And if I want to cross that street, I can cross it as a pedestrian, but I have to wait a little bit. Maybe I have to go some stairs or take a lift up and go over this or underground. I have to sort of share the space with these vehicles. They could be also driverless. But then within the neighborhood, you have this mixture of more human, related mobility at 5 to 10 kilometers per hour. That would be my future. And the reason why I'm actually in a way hopeful, because if you look at car ownership in cities, it's going down, including in Europe, in the same area of Paris that I showed. More than 50% of the people there don't have a car, which makes sense, because you have to pay for parking and so on. But so that's changing. The young people, the newer generation, don't buy cars till about 30 or 40 years old. It's too expensive. They want to spend their money somewhere else. And then this app-based mobility is quite something. I get into Stockholm, and I had forgotten how to come in, didn't ask anything, so I thought, well, I'll be just empirical, just live the life. So I take a ticket to go to the information counter. By the time I got there, Google, which is not necessarily my favorite, but Google had already told me the best way to come to the hotel. So, that part is kind of interesting. And in China, for instance, now I can take buses because of Google. And which is prohibited in China, right? But you still can get Google. And so I can take buses. It's better than the Ubers. It's not better than Metro. But why is it better than the Ubers? Because the Ubers, the drivers always start talking to you. Because they make a mistake in something and they talk to you. And you say, right? So they talk louder. And you go, and they start screaming at you. And you go, ah! So you scream back at them, and I get out of the car by the time, So no human interaction in China, but Google is good. So these apps are quite something. And if I were in better shape, I would get myself a little scooter, and I'll get all these other things, because that's kind of fun.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think your metrics on what's going on when cities are being built now are tremendous, and I'd just like to see organizations like UN Habitat produce those collect them and publish them continuously. Well, this is what we ought to have always in front of us when we're speaking about sustainable cities, smart cities, blah, blah, blah. We all have this language of sort of fuzzing up the real issues. There is, though, just one aspect that I miss in your metrics, and that is social cohesion. I'm quite sure you're familiar with the study that was done in Los Angeles, or was it in San Francisco many years ago by a guy by the name of either Appleyard or Apple, blah, blah.
Appleyard.
Appleyard.
Donald Appleyard, yeah.
Showing that if you increase traffic on similar kinds of streets from 2,000 per hour to 20,000 to a little bit more than that, the social fabric just is erased. Slowly but surely, people don't know each other. They don't talk on the street, so the whole social fabric is being ruined. But you know that study, yeah.
Yeah.
Then what do we do to get somebody to produce it? You have you ever tried to persuade them to do publish it? They do publish a lot of statistics, but not of this kind.
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. That so the one, for instance, when I show the 3 cases, the 19th century, the 20th century, and then the Yunnan province, talk also about the social fabric. And I think the reason we're not talking about it is that it's just the times. The times now, we are all sort of money oriented and economics oriented and tech oriented, right? So it's sort of fashion. So you wait for the economic crash, which is coming. The question is when. Then we'll come back and maybe think about the social a little more. So there's part of that. The other part is, the kind of metrics that exist for social are more on poverty. So there are good metrics on poverty, but there are not so many metrics on, like accepted metrics on sociability. So that, that's something to innovate in.
Thank you very much for your presentation and data that you showed. It's interesting that still in some part of the world, walking and cycling is still a social status of not doing it. That's the interesting part for me. Speaking globally, I wonder, did you come across some data that shows how car industry works globally, like the cities or the countries which produce car the most, and they send it to other countries that are already suffering from vehicle consumption and this relationship globally? Do you have any data related to that?
Not really. I don't know much about the car industry. I should, but the social status is actually my feeling is that it's really no longer there with the younger generation.
Yes, true.
And maybe younger generation, middle class and up. Maybe it is for the lower income people, especially let's say young poor boys, having a car.
Yeah.
But they can also have one of these motorcycles that I'm going to send Medusa to, right?
Yeah. Or for example, what I
so that's social status too.
Exactly. Or they use the car as kind of like their own private space and claiming the space for themselves when they drive cars on the street. That's what I've also seen in some societies. Another question I have, speaking of pace and speed and time, do you think in future the built environment could handle more multiple temporalities that support walking and cycling more? For example, we are all feeling that we are so much in rush in every day. So maybe I take car because I think I can reach my bank, otherwise I can't use it in the after work. The different timing of city functions.
Right.
And how the built environment and politics of use can support biking and cycling in that sense.
Right. It's well known that part of the reason people don't use public transport often because they have multiple things to do. But the other thing is to make clear is that it's, you know, I think that I use the Swedish model, my version of the Swedish model, okay, as an example. That people who live in cities, Swedes who live in the cities, do not use their car, most of them in cities. They all have, every household has a car. But most of them don't use their car like to go to work and so on. They may use their car to go shopping once in a while and so on. So it's not that you eliminate cars in cities, but you eliminate them as the prime mean of or mode of transportation. And so clearly we know also that, for instance, people with children spend much more time traveling. They put more miles on their car or whatever, whatever vehicle they have. So there are also different circumstances in your life that maybe when you have, you know, your two kids that are young, maybe that's when you use your car more often. But you don't need to do that when you're young and you don't have, you know, so many other things to do than take care of yourself, or older, for instance. So part of the problem with our world, and it's always like that, is that you're supposed to have one way of resolving all the problems of the world. And that's not the way it works, but somehow, and it's getting worse and worse with the sound bites and the quickness with which, you know, we have to communicate. So I should come in, you know, with this sort of one way to resolve all the problems of health in cities. And it's not going to be like that. So, yeah, look for, like, as a student or a person thinking about the future for your practice, look at into general, what are the theories? How can you sort of have some rules and patterns? But then also think that they have to be broken, or maybe not broken, but they have to be widened and broadened to accommodate all kinds of different things within it.
And thank you for the talk. I have multiple thoughts going on in my head, so I'm going to try to articulate them. One, following up on the temporality idea, have you come across studies where cities have sort of figured out ways to share the right-of-way in ways that, you know, high-speed cars can use the right-of-way from 6 to 8.
Yeah.
And 8 to 9 is only e-bikes. And then 9 to 10. Have you come across anything like that, so that the conflict that the gentleman pointed out could be resolved?
Yeah.
In other ways?
That's a very good one.
That's one.
The only one is freight. So a lot of cities have freight regulations. Right, and so you can, you know, the restaurants can get all their goods in between 6 and whatever. Yeah, so that way. But it's a very good idea. Excellent.
Have you come across any city that's
No.
trying it at any scale?
No.
Okay, so that's one. The other one is your ideas. For me, they work rather well at a neighborhood scale and perhaps even at the city scale. But then when you zoom out into the metro scale, where the highways come into the picture, and the time of commute, especially in the U.S., you know, people are living in one part of the city and commuting to the other part of the city to work. They are actually probably achieving greater speeds by car because they're relying on highways. And even with the traffic, they're probably saving some time if they were to bike. And besides, the highways don't allow you spaces to bike. So how do you think this would then, the benefits of it are probably at the neighborhood level and the city level, you think, or not at the metro level, because walkability and other non-motorized transportation sort of begin to crack when you move to the...
Yes, definitely. That's why if you look, the bicycle, you know, 6 kilometers, the e-bike, you could go maybe 12 kilometers. But beyond that, you're not going to do that. So you have to take the bus rapid transit, or you have to take the metro. And then in the US, you don't have that choice, basically. I mean, the US cities are very, very difficult to retrofit for better health or better air quality or better anything. Very, very difficult. They're just not dense enough.
So then how does the health benefit unfold in the metro context? I'm just trying to understand, like...
Well, but so what people in the States, you know, that are sort of pushing these ideas, they're saying it, you know, that you use active transport beginning at the end of the day, right? When you go to work and when you come back, you have this part of the travel that is active travel. That's all you can do, but you can still spend, you know, the rest of your time in your car.
And there's still benefit.
Yeah. But in terms of, I thought you were going into travel efficiencies, because that's the other thing, is that you see even the densest cities, Shanghai is still long. I mean, when you go from the center to the end of the subway lines, it's an hour, right? So it's a very long ride, and the subways go fast, but maybe not fast enough. You'd want to have something a little faster than that, right? So that you can carry that distance in half an hour as opposed to an hour. And so there is always, the idea on the superblock, you can go up a level with a faster means of transport, or underground, even faster. So you could have, just like you have in the train, direct trains, local trains, you could have that with, you have that actually with regional train systems. I thought you were talking about, that aspect, but yeah. And so in the Japanese have, I think, excellent ways to put freeways up in the air that don't seem to matter. I mean, I hate them, in the States. They just, and then, they're bad because all the homeless, they go underneath there. Or we put parking lots under the freeways in the US and so on. In Japan, first of all, they're very high. They paint them white, so, all the light is reflected. They put the trees going through them at the street level. So if you're a little, person walking, you don't even notice this thing up there. It's like a skyscraper, right? Like you don't really notice them. So there are ways to sort of really pack fast transportation in the city, if you do it well, that doesn't affect the daily life underneath there.
Just coming back to having the fast waves above ground, I was wondering what you were thinking about Elon Musk Boring Company of putting cars
in Los Angeles, you mean?
No, underground in
tunnels.
Yeah.
Because he has actually has the right to do, I don't know, miles of tunnels under Los Angeles, right?
Exactly.
That's what you're talking about.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Elon Musk. Okay.
I think that was the answer, right? Okay.
That's it.
Yeah. But Anne, thank you so much for this versatile, very nice, nuanced presentation, and I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And we give a warm hand of applause to Anne, of course.